I'm Jeremy Tran, Executive Director and CEO of Gold House. We're their largest collective of Asian Pacific cultural changemakers.
Welcome to the Vietnamese. I'm your host, Kenneth Nguyen. Being part of a culture of nearly 100 million Vietnamese people in the world today comes with a lot of pain, proud history, and privilege. Join me as I highlight and explore the Vietnamese experience from all over. Thank you for coming on today, Jeremy. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
So, can you talk a little bit about the mission of Gold House and how it was founded?
Of course. So we were founded in 2018 in a room full of Asian Pacific leaders from across different industries. And we came together and realized that there was so much more we could do to support each other. And it makes sense that we're such a disparate community. We represent dozens of different ethnicities and languages and have different experiences of how our families or ourselves came to the United States. But at the same time, while giving space to celebrate those differences, we knew there were a lot of moments and causes that we can rally behind and support each other with. So with that, we started Gold House really to first and foremost to bring those leaders together, and then secondly to harness their energy, their resources, their passions towards elevating the Asian Pacific community by focusing on a few causes we thought could really do that. So we started in entertainment and media representation because I think regardless of your background, we all understood what it meant to not be seen, not be heard accurately on the screen, on the big screen, the small screen, etc. So that's where we started. Supported a film called Crazy Rich Asians, which did very well. It was #1 in the box office, became the highest grossing rom-com in over a decade, and since then kind of elevated a lot of Asian Pacific stories, and Gold House kind of grew along with that. We've now focused on more than just media representation, but also on investing back into the community through a slate of different accelerator incubator programs we have focused on entrepreneurs to emerging artists and creatives.
Now, I'm imagining going back to 2017, where maybe a group of you got together or probably saw each other at networking events. I mean, how did that genesis come about? Because I can't imagine just, this powerhouse group of guys or gals get together. There has to be something that kind of put you guys all in the same room together, right?
Right. And it really was that moment of Crazy Rich Asians. We, in many ways, knew each other through just different networking, different career paths that we took. So my co-founder and the CEO, Bing Chen, was a YouTube executive for many years before he left and went into the startup world and eventually started Gold House. And so he had a lot of connections, especially in the Silicon Valley. I was a lawyer for about 7 years or so before I left to co-found Gold House, and I worked mostly in entertainment media litigation and worked in LA for quite some time. So I think through our different contacts over the years, as well as those who helped co-found Gold House or other co-founders, and we were able to bring leaders who may not have had the space to cross paths in their everyday jobs as much. And Crazy Rich Asians gave us an anchoring moment and reason to come together and say, hey, you may be, VP at a bank or the C-suite executive at a tech platform, but you know what the importance of this film is like and why we need to make sure that it does well in the box office, because the ripple effects and the impact far exceed just Hollywood.
I'm not sure how much my listeners know the impact of Gold House in the United States, but this is what we're here to really expound on. When I think about the founding of Gold House and the serendipity of Crazy Rich Asian, I imagine and I try to think about which came first. Did the group come first or did Crazy Rich Asians? Because I know Shang-Chi was right after that. So it's like this serendipitous moment in the history of Asian American media. So how did that sort of chronologically go down? You guys all got together and then Crazy Rich Asians, or you guys saw it on the horizon and you guys just went for it?
Yeah, before Crazy Rich Asians, we were I would say more a collective that didn't have the formal foundation of what the Gold House Inc. is now. So when it started, it really was branded as Gold House, but it was more of an informal group of leaders across different industries. When we started to see the momentum swell and the demand and excitement from the community, as well as leaders that wanted something like this to exist, we then Bing and I then made the commitment and said, "Hey, let's make this a real thing. Let's give it the legs and the foundation it needs so that it's sustainable and it's not just one film, one weekend in the box office." And that's when I left my job at a big law firm and took the risk and said, "Hey, I'm really passionate about this. I love the people I'm meeting. Let's dedicate our time to this and give it a shot." And since then, it's been about 4 years, and we've grown tremendously, and really, really feel blessed that the community continues to support us and to support all the different projects that come our way.
Why do you think this has not started before 2017?
Ken, I'll say there are a lot of great organizations that have been here, and that we our work relies on the paths that they've created for decades. I think the type of visibility that we've been fortunate enough to receive has really been a mix of different factors. One being just timing, really, and it's because of external factors and the elevation of certain stories, certain companies, certain leaders have kind of come to their sweet spot now. I think that we're kind of there with them. So a lot of it comes down to timing. And then secondly, I would say that um, we're proud to be at the intersection in many ways of different communities and different industries. We don't serve just film and TV. We also work a lot in the venture capital world, in the tech world, in the fashion world, in the sports world, and being able to touch upon so many different industries and plant seeds in so many different industries has given us that I would say 360 holistic strategy and influence across many different sectors that have allowed us to advance our brand, our community, our network in a way that I think may not have been done before.
Now, there's a lot of communities that you really serve within the Asian American space. Now, the Latino market, the mainstream English speaking markets, those are a little bit, I wouldn't say easier to unify because I'm sure they have their factions and their different groups, but the Latino market speaks Spanish. English, obviously, mainstream is English, but there's so many different languages within the Asian American space, and I'm sure there's all these cultural glitches that sort of don't mesh sometime, perhaps. How do you sort of mitigate around all these differences? And because I can imagine how difficult it is to kind of bring all of these different cultures together to make it work and be unified.
It's a challenge we think about every single day, Ken, and we represent over 4 billion people in the world, right? There's no easy way to try to unite the vast majority of the world around certain causes. And at the same time, we want to be able to celebrate those unique experiences and differences between the cultures. As a Vietnamese American, it's different. My family's story of coming to the United States is very different, for example, from maybe somebody who is a fourth generation Japanese American. And we don't want to feel like we are a monolith in any way, or that all of our experiences are the same. So we want to make sure there's space and room to celebrate those unique experiences. At the same time, however, I think a lot of us viscerally can understand and feel certain things that we all have dealt with in our lives. And and can find ways to work together to try to solve. And that's something not just within the Asian American and Pacific Islander community, but also with our allies in other marginalized communities who have felt othered, who have felt certain barriers being presented that we have to break through. And it's those commonalities that I think really, really encourage all of us to come together and say, hey, like I recognize you've had different experiences than me, but we also have things that we can focus on to try to dismantle and try to elevate our community at large.
It's a high wire balancing act within the Asian American space, but I can also think about it being a place where it's difficult because we, as people who are born in America, have friends who are in the white mainstream spaces and black mainstream spaces. And how do we sort of go about and approach representation and getting our voices heard without, I feel like sometimes overpowering, being over militant, and the balancing of sort of that, it's a high wire balancing act to me to get work done, because we do need everybody involved, not just Asian Americans in our space.
Exactly.
We need to reach across, a broad spectrum of groups. How do you find that? Because, it's a fight is a fight, but it's not at the same time, right? So, I wonder about that kind of, that the juggling act that you have to do.
Yeah, I'll speak about this, I think, in the way we approach talking about certain projects and why it's important to support certain projects. Whenever I speak to a partner, whether it's a studio or streamer or a influential person who's interested in supporting a certain film or TV series, we go about it explaining that diversity, inclusion, all those buzzwords you hear is really not a box to be checked for like good sakes, but actually can influence and impact your bottom line. And the way that a film that is diverse, quote unquote, does well is that it shows up authentically, right? And we can sniff out something that
Yeah.
seems performative. So explaining that to our partners and encouraging them to reframe and reimagine the way that they've been thinking diversity, inclusion in those words, and integrating it authentically, realistically into their overall strategy is the approach to take because audiences today are demanding that type of content. And audience today reflect such a diverse group of people who want to see their stories being told in an authentic manner. So it's not militant in any ways. We're not here to say you have to do XYZ, otherwise, your film is going to flop. But rather saying, let's work together and let us explain to you why this, at the end of the day, is actually going to help your bottom line.
And how receptive are the people listening?
I would say it's been such a refreshing change in
Mm.
many ways over the last 3, 4, 5 years since we've been in existence. I think at the very beginning it was a newer concept for a lot of partners, right? And to this day, there's still the multicultural department, the multicultural marketing department, right? It's important that they exist, but in many situations, their budgets, their influence may not be as large as the overall like mainstream marketing or mainstream departments. But we've seen that change over the years, really, really change in meaningful ways where everyone now, for the most part, understands the importance of thinking through how to show up authentically. And even if they haven't made leaps and bounds, they're opening their doors, welcoming us to their table to explain our position, our opinions, and really listening hard. And I feel like everyone is trying their best to figure out what the correct path is. And it has really improved a lot over the years.
It's very satisfying to hear you say that. I mean,
There's still a lot to do, but I think for the most part, everyone's hearts and minds are really changing and really in the right place now.
Yeah, because sometimes we think of this social media and we see all the fighting and we see all the polarization in America, but oftentimes when you really dig down to the layers of people who are making decisions, people are really putting their best foot forward and putting a lot of effort into helping underrepresented communities like ours to be heard and to be seen.
Exactly. And I think sometimes the loudest voices that we hear in social media, for example, aren't reflective of the majority of people. So what's been refreshing for us is that we get to work really behind the scenes a lot, right? And we get to talk to a lot of these powerful people with the ability to make important decisions. And everyone we've talked to and everyone we work with and choose to work with does have a very open mind and does have their heart in the right place and are trying to navigate so many different factors to make things right. And if at the end product or whatever it is you may see on screen or on like Instagram may look like it's not perfect, but a lot of times there's so much work behind the scenes being done to try to make it as perfect as possible. And it's not as black and white as social media may make it seem to be.
Where did you spend your childhood and what was it like growing up for you?
Oh gosh, I grew up in Westminster in Little Saigon, in Southern California, born and raised. My family's from Saigon, and they came over to the United States in 1981, one of the last waves of boat people. And luckily, they ended up in Westminster, and I feel so blessed because we have family. As much as I love many different Vietnamese American communities, I think it's just such a unique space
Yeah.
that does not exist in anywhere else that I've seen. And it's given my family an opportunity to feel both American and Vietnamese American in many ways and continue to hold on to their heritage and culture. For me, it was a way that I made sure I maintained my language, understanding the history of our people, and really just feeling that type of love and community that I don't think I would have had I grown up in a different space.
I am very surprised that you grew up in Westminster.
Really?
Yeah. I totally pegged you for an East Coast guy.
Yeah, I spent that's so funny because I grew up in Westminster and then I went to school in the Northeast, and moved to the Boston area for 7 years. I think in many ways that was the first time I really leaned into my Vietnamese American identity, because growing up, we were the majority in Westminster. My high school was probably 50, 60% Vietnamese American at least.
Where did you go to
Uh,
high school?
I went to Westminster High School.
Wow.
Like I was as Vietnamese American as
Yeah.
it gets in many ways. So there was no need for me to feel compelled to join, the Vietnamese American Club or whatever it's called in high school. But when I went to Harvard. And when I came to Harvard, um, usually there were probably a handful of Vietnamese American students per class. My year had about 20. And it was the very first time I felt suddenly different, and being surrounded by people who had very different life experiences. I remember when my family came in and we moved into my freshman dorm, all of my freshman roommates went to boarding school their
Yeah.
whole lives and kind of had Harvard, probably on their vision board or whatever since they were toddlers. And for me, it was just kind of a totally unexpected experience. So um, dealing with a lot of that probably changed the way I sound, changed the way I appear. And for the first time, that's when I joined the Vietnamese Students Association and started being more involved in understanding my identity.
Even when I say that I thought that you were from the East Coast, that brings a weird connotation. I feel guilty for even saying that because what I'm implying is that the community in Orange County uh, is incapable. This sounds very harsh, but is incapable of producing somebody who has the world view to operate in Hollywood, right? Because typically, bump into a lot of East Coast Vietnamese in Hollywood, and it's the sort of like a more assertive, more aggressive, more broad in their understanding of culture. And typically in Orange County, it's very homogenous, like you said. It's you grow up around a lot of Vietnamese, so the career trajectories are very different. So can you tell me a little bit about once you have spent a few years at Harvard and sort of getting your footing in on the East Coast, what sort of like differences did you notice in growth in your own sort of thinking versus growing up in Westminster?
Yeah, I always encourage whenever the opportunity to go speak to students at Westminster High School or just students in that general area. I always encourage them to consider college outside of Orange County. I think it's very turnkey in many ways for us to all go to UCI,
Yes.
UCLA. And that's what I thought I would do, growing up, because that's what you're told to do and what you see all of your friends and your older siblings do. For me, I would say the scariest and best decision I made was to leave that
Hmm.
Vietnamese American Orange County bubble, because it really forced me to grow in ways
Yeah.
I may not have been ready for at 18, but you much like our parents, who may not have been ready for the United States when they came over here on a boat, and flew over here. They showed a resilience that I think really defines a lot of the core values of the Vietnamese American community. So for me, forcing myself to leave my comfort zone, friends I've known since kindergarten that I grew up with, um, and go to a place with people who have such vastly different experiences than I did growing up, was remarkably challenging at first, but it forced me to find and answer questions about myself that I would not have had the opportunity to do or really have the courage to think about had I just stayed in Orange
Yeah.
County my entire life.
And then did you go to Harvard Law School right after undergrad at Harvard?
I did. So in college, I really didn't know what I wanted to do after college, and I tried many different career paths and different internships. Ended up not liking really any of them, so uh, didn't study any pre-med courses at all. So for me, it's kind of going down that safe path. What can I do? Let's go to law school, and I went straight to Harvard Law School. Moved essentially across the street to that campus, and then stayed there and decided I don't think I can live in the East Coast and I want to move back home. But again, Orange County was a little too close to home. The different industries that Orange County focused on, I think, was not where I wanted to be, which is why I ended up in Los Angeles.
Now, going from a big law firm to Gold House, I'd imagine that's like a big risk and a big pay cut, right? What
Oh, yeah.
really kept you going and what motivated you to really push through?
Oh gosh, this is funny. This is something my parents asked me a lot in the beginning. How do you explain to your parents, you finished law school or at a big law firm, and 6, 7 years into the law firm, now you want to leave and start a nonprofit? I still think my parents don't fully understand what I do, but they know I'm happy. Um, Ken, to answer your question, for me, it was I got to a place in my career where I was fortunate enough that I finished paying off my student loans. I was faced with the decision of, do you want to stay, and work to become a partner at this law firm, or do you want to think about doing something else? And I had the opportunity to work on some incredibly high profile trials during my career at the law firm. Um, but it didn't give me the sense of fulfillment that I was looking for long term. So uh, I was not brave enough just to quit the law firm, but I
Mm.
asked for a sabbatical for 6 months to figure out whether I wanted to continue down this path towards becoming a partner or whether I want to do something else. And they graciously gave me that time. And it was during that time that I turned to Bing and said, I have 6 months to kind of try this out. Let's see how it goes. Um, and we absolutely just loved everyone we met and loved the energy and the work that we did. So I said, you know what, I'm not going to go back to the law firm. I just can't imagine going back to
Wow.
my desk job from there.
It takes a lot of courage.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
I mean, let me say the first few years, like we didn't take any salary or anything. I was living off my savings for years, and so was Bing. And it took us some time to make sure that we got Gold House to a place that we even felt comfortable even trying to make sure that it's sustainable by paying ourselves. And then eventually now we have a team of over 15 employees. And it's been remarkable to get to this place.
What is your day to day like as the executive director and COO of Gold House?
I'll show you an image of my calendar at some point. It's it's mostly meetings all day, events at night, mixed in with some fun, creative moments, such as watching early screeners, reading scripts, talking to different partners about how we can collaborate with them so that we meet their strategic goals while also elevating our community. But in the day, it's a good variety of things. It's very fast paced, like any startup probably would be, and very different from what I did as a lawyer.
Gold House has their footprint in a lot of different things. The Gold List, the Gold House Futures, Gold Gala, Netflix Gold. I mean, it goes on and on and on. All these events and programming. Can you tell me how these things land and develop within at Gold House, and how do they become these full-fledged sort of mini enterprises?
Yeah, that's there's no, I would say, no templatized way that a lot of these programs do come to life. But I will say there's certain elements that are common throughout that have been the reason behind the success of so many of our programs. One is that we work with external partners in a very strategic and authentic way to make them feel just as invested in the success of the program. And this could be something as big as a Netflix, or it could be one or two individual journalists or one or two individual fashion designers that we're trying to support and elevate. Having their commitment to the program's success really involves making the time to get to understand what they're trying to do, how we can leverage our resources and our network to achieve those mutual goals, and then ensuring that we continue to involve them throughout the process and through the evolution of any of these programs. From there, we meet with all of our members on a regular basis. Bing and I just talked to 300 of our members, literally, personally, to get their feedback about, how are things going since we started Gold House 3 or 4 years ago? What do you see are the needs for the Asian American and Pacific Islander community? What could we do better? What are your dreams and goals personally? And we've digested all that information to really inform how we can take our brand and our resources and network into the future.
So wait a minute. Let's break this down. You said 300. Is there like an intake form, or like how does that process work? Is it you and Bing sitting through all of these Zoom calls with people, or you guys send out Google Forms?
Yeah, when we met with our membership, it took us about a year to get through all 300 of sample size of our members. And we personally met with all of them, whether it's calls or Zooms. And it was time that we knew was important because when we started Gold House in 2018 or so, 2017, 2018, we also met with hundreds of leaders, whether it's in intimate dinners or one-on-one, to get their feedback as to what would be a meaningful organization for them to participate in. And now, 3 or 4 years later, we wanted to make sure that we continue to involve them in defining what it is we do.
You know, I have a question that I wrote down to ask about the secret sauce, and I think I'm hearing it right now. Because that sort of customization, that sort of tailoring to the needs of each individual, to spend a whole year to go through this sample size group is the key. It's really the key to developing programs and events, and all sorts of ideation comes from talking and engaging with people that are in your organization.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we want to make sure everyone understands that we're here to support them, right? That's the reason we exist. We're here to support their careers, their aspirations, and at the same time to support the community at large. So our programming in many ways should never be top down, and it should involve the thoughts of everyone. And not to say that everyone agrees and not everyone thinks in the same way or thinks that we should prioritize the same things, but it is informative to see all the different opinions out there, and then from there craft our strategy and digest all that information that really is coming from so many people who are way smarter than I am, who are touching on industries that I never get the chance to on a day-to-day basis, but see the value in having an organization like ours exist and supporting them personally.
You sound like the idea you talking to you makes it seem like this idea of like an imperfect world of American media is working itself out in a very perfect way almost. It's imperfect, but it's being perfected. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But if you were to think of a perfect world in the American media landscape, what would that look like?
Oh gosh. I honestly don't know if I can define what perfection would look like. Um I think people will always be wanting more, and that's not a bad thing, right? I think um people will always be growing, changing their priorities, changing what it is that they want to see, um, to reflect their values at that time. So for me, I would say a perfect landscape in media would involve seeing more stories that are reflective of the overall population. But I wouldn't be able to give you a concrete number or concrete boundaries on what that actually means.
Okay, so now when we think of Gold House and putting their putting your touch on the different projects and the different films and content that comes out, there has to be a very clear vetting process. Without sort of I don't want to be too critical about a growing Asian American content universe. Without putting it down, how do you vet? Because there's a lot of things that are not of quality, and then there's just a very small percentage of things that are really good stuff, right? So how do you go about saying yes and no to things that you are asked to be involved in?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something we think about a lot in deciding how we show up and how much we show up for certain content. So I would say a couple of things here. One, there is a baseline in terms of quality that we will not, we will not support content that perpetuates pernicious stereotypes or harmful stereotypes, or really is taking us back, setting us back decades. For the good part, or the good majority of content we see now, that isn't the case. And I think Hollywood is very sensitive to making sure that they're not doing that. Yes, there are nuances that can be changed, and there are details that can be changed that may be more subtle in perpetuating certain stereotypes, but for the most part, the blatant whitewashing of characters, etc. We don't come across much, if at all, anymore. But that is, kind of the baseline. From there, I would say we evaluate a couple things. One is really the quality, the high quality, the parasites, the everything everywhere all at once of the world. When we see a film like that and we know it's so special, we will do all that we can to make sure that it does well, and encourage our community base to go out and see it, to support it, to buy tickets, to buy out entire theaters, to fill the theaters, and really make sure that these stories and these films that are of such high quality really penetrate the mainstream, whether it's in awards, whether it's box office numbers, in a way that we may not have seen in the past. The second factor I would highlight is impact, and that's a cultural impact number. Now, without getting myself in trouble, I would say, certain films aren't of that quality necessarily, where you think they're going to win Best Picture at the Academy Awards. But that's not to say that there isn't space for really fun, commercial popcorn films,
Yeah.
And TV series that are equally important to changing the cultural zeitgeist. So we see those films and we say, hey, this is probably not going to win an Academy Award. The strategy may be different, but it can really go a long way in showing that our films are just as commercially viable, right? Are just as capable of being number one in the box office. And it's not prestige as much as it is cultural impact. And there's a lot of films and TV series with support in that vein as well.
Now, going back a little bit to what you were saying about portrayal and projects or completed projects that are forwarded to you all, and you see fault or you see different things that it makes you uncomfortable. Is it our job to call them out and let them know, or do you gotta let it just slide out and just let them exist and just give them a soft no?
Yeah, so I would say, when you say "our," I'll kind of break that apart a little bit. So I think there are certain organizations that exist, to really be that I don't know what to call them, the watchdog in some ways, and call out things that may not be done accurately or done harmfully. Um, and it's great that they exist in the ecosystem, because I think there is space for that, and there's space for people to be very critical and to be that stick in many ways, slapping, the studios
Yeah.
and Hollywood in ways that they're not doing well. On the other hand, there's importance to having organizations like Gold House, and like there's several others that we work very closely with as well, where we are focused more on celebrating the wins, and focused more on working in partnership with the creators and the studios and the networks, so that those moments hopefully will be corrected before they go out to the public. So we're definitely not a watchdog organization in many ways that a traditional one would be viewed as. We're more, what we like to say is that we hold the carrot. We say, if you're going to do well, like Everything Everywhere All at Once, we will bring the backing of our entire community and network to reward you for doing well, right?
Mm.
Rather than bringing the backing of our network to punish you for doing
Yeah.
something poorly.
But in the sort of closed doors, do you let them know, producers that come to you with things that are completed and they're like, hey, can you take a look at this? Do you let them know, like, hey, this is what's wrong, or this perhaps is not coinciding with the vision that we see for the community? Do you let them know?
Yeah, if they bring us on, so a lot of projects bring us on quite early, as early as scripting, like even before scripts are written, casting, to work with them as consultants to think through a lot of these
Mm.
issues. In those situations, those are the ideal situations,
Yeah.
right? Where we're brought in very early and able to work hand in hand with the creative team, to create something really magical. Other times we are brought on once the project is completed and they're asking us for our opinions, and we have to work with the realities there, right? Um, I will let you know, like there are projects we've been brought on to consult that we didn't publicly support in the way that we've supported other films, because we said there are a lot of issues here. We'll help identify them for you and try to help you navigate through them. But given that you can't make all of these changes, like we can't ourselves encourage our community to go out and support this film the way we would have had you brought us in earlier to fix those things from the beginning.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, there we talked about the different things that Goldhouse does, but are there any like sort of main pillars? You said accelerators, the gala. Do you have like a formal sort of structure or organization or buckets that you can break down?
Yeah, so we think of our pillars and all of our programs fitting under three. One being unity, and that's focused on our members, bringing our community together, and finding moments to celebrate our wins, and also uh, harnessing resources when we need to. For example, the Monterey Park shootings. When that happened, we were actually all at Sundance, and immediately called up GoFundMe and our friends there and said, "Hey, we need to start something now." Corralled dozens of different Asian American groups to come together to really start pushing out that fundraiser, and raised over $1 million in a few days. So that's unity. Second is representation, and that's all of the efforts we do in terms of media and entertainment representation, from consulting to promotion work, to now research that we've been working closely with research institutions and conducting ourselves. And then finally, the third pillar we call success. And that's focused on all the investment efforts that we do, from investing in entrepreneurs to next gen musicians, contemporary artists, filmmakers, and so forth.
And are there more pillars in development, or are these three enough for the next decade to kind of ramp?
I think broadly speaking, these three have helped us focus our energy to understand when certain things may not necessarily be aligned with what we should be doing, and that there are other organizations better served doing this. Um, I don't see us changing this necessarily anytime soon, but we are broadening the programming that we are focused on under each of them. So to give you some concrete examples, with representation, we've been doing more and more work with other marginalized and underrepresented groups, whether it's with the Black community, the Indigenous community, the Latino community, and so forth, because we know, like you said earlier, Ken, we can't exist in a silo in many ways. We wouldn't succeed if we're just here for APIs and only by APIs. So we found opportunities to work with those other community groups and to elevate their films and their stories as well, and are putting more concrete, actionable programming around that moving forward.
Now, this is not a trick question, but it's going to come out a little bit tricky and complicated. So I exist in a very myopic space because it's the Vietnamese podcast, right? So this is what I focus on is the Vietnamese. You, as a Vietnamese man, are swimming in a much bigger ocean of Asian Americans, and you just said you're much broader mainstream. But do you ever look at Vietnamese people in the entertainment industry and go, you could learn a little bit more from that community? Or in your mind, does it ever come across? And like I said, it's not a gotcha moment. I just think about your position. Like as I was working on your questions, I was like, I wonder if he ever thinks about like, because you're at a 30,000 foot, you're looking at all of the communities and you're like, okay, those guys are doing it right. These guys are, and then you're thinking about the Vietnamese community, broad strokes could probably improve in this way. I know it's a very touchy question, but again, I come from it very myopically, and.
Not at all. I appreciate that question. And I think I'll start broadly for the API community, then more specifically about the Vietnamese American community. For us, when we started Goldhouse, we looked at the Black communities, and we looked at the Jewish communities, the strong networks for women, and saw what those communities did for films, for projects that they cared about, and how they were really able to come together and support a film like a Black Panther, for example. Um, and people from outside of entertainment were supporting films like a Black Panther. So we envied that in many ways and said, how do we create something similar? How do we learn from them and ways that they bring the communities together, their communities together to support that type of content? And that's kind of where we started with the broader Asian American and Pacific Islander community. To speak specifically about the Vietnamese American community, I would say for a lot of us, uh, our families came over in the 70s and 80s, 90s maybe as well. So we're kind of our generation is coming to the age now where we are starting to lead companies and starting to lead projects in a way that maybe our parents' generation didn't have that opportunity because they came over here under different circumstances. So when I see other Asian American uh, community groups who've had a longer time, honestly, in the United States. I look up to them and say, "Wow, you've been here, you've kind of uh, gone through all the different challenges you go through culturally, from from adjusting to being in the United States to not always wanting to be a doctor or a lawyer and trying different creative industries as well or careers as well." And I see our time is really just coming. And I've been very excited about a lot of the different talent and content we have coming out. We had a great film at Sundance called The Accidental Getaway Driver. We have The Sympathizer coming out on HBO, soon. So there's a lot of great content and a lot of amazing leaders really starting to step up to represent our community specifically.
It's a great answer. Now, if you weren't doing the work that you are doing now, and if it was like you lived in a fantasy world, what do you think you'd be doing?
I love that. I love that. And I ask this question all the time of anyone I'm interviewing or anyone I talk to. Uh, I, at core, love to create. So that means writing. I used to
Mm,
draw and paint a lot as well. And it was that creative side of my brain that I didn't get to. Um, I didn't have the luxury of or the courage really to
yeah.
flex as much growing up because I just took the stable career paths. Like I wouldn't be able to tell my parents I'm going to become an artist. I think that they would be so confused. And for me, it was like, okay, let's focus on school. Let's study science, math, and then for me, even becoming a lawyer was a controversial decision because they always wanted me to become a doctor. So I say this in all honesty. If I could do anything, I would love to write and illustrate children's books. Uh,
Wow. Wow.
that's something I hope to do
Yeah.
someday. And something I would love to do with my sister as well. She's also very creative, but she's a dentist, also had a very safe career path. But she's a pediatric dentist, and her office that she has, she painted all of the paintings there. She finds ways to flex her creativity, and it would be really meaningful for us to get to a place in our careers where we're comfortable and saying, hey, let's I don't know, write a children's book together and draw it together as well.
Wow, it's so adorable. I mean,
Yeah.
I have a 4 and a 5-year-old, and I can totally empathize with that sort of creative endeavor.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, have you been to Vietnam?
I have. I went once in 2012, so it's been over 10 years ago. Gosh.
It's changed.
It's I'm sure it's changed a lot. Yeah. Um, my parents still have not been back since they left. And I think it's in their minds, in many ways, they've lost the country that they know. But my sister and I are trying to encourage them to go with us at some point in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that's such a contentious issue in many families,
Yeah.
especially for me and my brother. My brother's been there for 20 years. He teaches and he has a
Wow.
company, he does animation for American studios here. And we bump into parents all the time that are really against going back to participate in any endeavor in Vietnam, and we find that to be heartbreaking. And we have parents and uncles and everybody who's suffered on on both sides, and the big reconciliation word is a bad word in
Yeah,
Little Saigon, so it's something that we have to tiptoe around right now, and I hope that it changes.
I do too. It's funny because growing up in Westminster, you see one viewpoint, and you get
Yeah.
it. It's hard when your family went through a war and they came here under those circumstances. Um, but when I went to college, it was the first time I got to meet people from Vietnam, from quote unquote the other side, in many ways.
Yeah.
Students, classmates of mine who were foreign students, international students from Vietnam. I took Vietnamese language from a professor who's from Vietnam and taught us Vietnamese history from his perspective as
Wow.
well. So it really just encouraged me to keep an open mind that I didn't necessarily get to have growing up in Westminster. And that's what pushed me to travel to Vietnam after law school, just to see what it's like, to see the people there and learn the culture and how it's evolved since my parents have left.
Well, what does it mean to be Vietnamese to you nowadays?
It's funny because working in this space now, which and constantly thinking about representation, about the Asian American Pacific Islander communities is work. And in many ways, in the past, it was always something as a side hobby, a side passion. So I think for me, when it was a side passion and hobby, it was always very constantly exciting to be able to do something that I didn't get to do in a day to day. Now, like when I think about it, it is so integral to what I do
Yeah.
every single moment. From the moment I wake up, it's not that it's less exciting; it's just more tactical, I would say, more less big picture. But how do I execute getting to that dream state of what I want to be at? Because now that's my job. That's my job now, to actually start putting that in motion and to get that achieved, rather than just thinking about it like what I don't know, what event can I go to after work, but actually this is my work.
Yeah. And what do you think the Vietnamese culture has contributed to the world at large?
Oh gosh, where do you begin with that? um, I would say I would give you like a fun answer, and then maybe some deeper answers if I can try to be compelling in some way. Fun answers is I think we have the best food
Yeah.
overall, and I think everyone I've met who's tried Vietnamese food agrees, and that it's so diverse and it brings in so many different um, types of produce, types of protein, flavors, just because of where we were situated in the world, I
Yeah.
think, and influences from different cultures as well. So, a fun answer, I think, yeah, it's just that food is just so incredible and something that I'm always so proud to share with people who may not have had the opportunity to try something besides banh mi or pho.
Yeah.
Um, and then a deeper answer, I think, is that the world saw the war, in the 70s. And I'm excited for the sympathizer to come out to make it even more mainstream to audiences today, and just the impact of what a war like that could have on a people. But at the end of the day, the resilience and the beauty of not just us, but of so many people around the world who are able to push through something that traumatic, and come out of it thriving and come out of it doing so much incredible things for our community and beyond.
Your work in the last short few years have been so impactful. I look forward to the next decade of your work at Gold House and all the things that you've been doing and continue to do. Thank you so much today for spending this time with me. Is there anything else that you want to share with me on your journey, about your journey, or with Gold House?
I just wanted to thank you, Ken. Having this space and you creating this space for our community has been so wonderful. I think when I say there are leaders out there doing things specifically for the Vietnamese American community, I include you in that, and I appreciate all the work that you've been doing to spotlight our stories. So thank you.
And I appreciate your kind words. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for listening to The Vietnamese with Kenneth Nguyen. The Vietnamese is produced by Brittany Tran. Special thanks to Jane Nguyen, Catherine Nguyen, Tina Pham, Sydney Jamie, and Christo Trin. Please find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at The Vietnamese Podcast. You can also find us on YouTube, where you can subscribe, like, and comment. Please rate and give us a review wherever you find our podcasts.